Oliver Cowdery says, "My eyes saw, my ears heard, and my understanding was touched. And I know that whereof I testified is true. It was no dream, no vain imagination of the mind. It was real." He says, "Young man, I had the privilege of being with the prophet Joseph Smith, and with these eyes of mine, pointing to his eyes, he says, I saw the angel of the Lord, and I saw the plates. I will say once more to all mankind that I have never at any time denied that testimony or any part thereof. I also testify to the world that neither Oliver nor Martin Harris ever at any time denied their testimony. They both died affirming the truth of the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon." And I personally feel that if critics just focus on a few second or third hand statements and make it seem like, well, this is what the witnesses actually said about their experience of seeing the angel in the plates, and omit all of these statements, I think that's misleading. I don't think that's being transparent or fair to the witnesses about what they believe they experienced. Mormonism with the Murph, where Larry Singh explores church history and the church's truth claims. Okay, so what I'm going to do to finish is I'm going to read through a lot of the sources and statements, whether first-hand, second-hand, or maybe even some third-hands, from the witnesses, which are either omitted, which were not discussed in the episode. Now, these are going to be primarily the faithful statements, and I'm not going to go over the ones that they went through in the episode, like from Stephen Burnett or Anthony Metcalf. I have around 10 sources for Oliver Cowdery, 15 for Martin Harris, and close to 40 for David Whitmer. So I wasn't able to find the supposed 150 that Richard Lloyd Anderson says there is, and 150 would be way too much. But you're going to get, I think, a very good picture of what they claimed about their vision of the angel in the plates. And I'll probably provide minimal commentary unless I think it is necessary or connects with some things they said in the episode. Okay, and obviously you can watch and read the quotes as well, but I'm just going to read a lot of them and mainly what's just highlighted in yellow as the key part. So we're going to start with Oliver Cowdery. So he says in 1829, this comes from the Painesville Telegraph. He writes, "It was a clear, open, beautiful day, far from any inhabitant in a remote field. At the time we saw the record of which it has been spoken, brought and laid forth before us by an angel arrayed in glorious light, who ascended and descended, I suppose, out of the midst of heaven. Now, if this is human juggling, judge ye." So if this is juggling or trickery, saying very matter of fact, an angel arrayed in glorious light came down out of the midst of heaven, and there was in the midst of them. Oliver Cowdery was once asked, I've got this from Fair, "Was your testimony based on a dream? Was it the imagination of your mind? Was it an illusion?" He responded with the exact same qualifying statements as the other two witnesses. Oliver Cowdery says, "My eyes saw, my ears heard, and my understanding was touched. And I know that whereof I testified is true. It was no dream, no vain imagination of the mind. It was real." So to him, it wasn't a dream. It wasn't an imagination of the mind. It wasn't juggling. It was real. That what he saw, what he heard, and what he testifies of. For a letter written in 1848, he says, "I beheld with my eyes and handled with my hands the gold plates from which it was transcribed. I also saw with my eyes and handled with my hands the holy interpreters. That book is true." And I think likely the reference to handling the gold plates and the interpreters is when Oliver was helping his scribe, but his seeing the plates was his vision of the angel. When Thomas B. Marsh was excommunicated as an apostle, he asked Whitmer and Cowdery to learn the real truth about the Book of Mormon, since they were now excommunicated with him. And this is what Marsh reported. "I inquired seriously at David if it was true that he had seen the angel according to his testimony as one of the witnesses of the Book of Mormon. He replied, as sure as there is a God in heaven, he saw the angel according to his testimony in that book. I asked him, if so, how did he not stand by Joseph? He answered, in the days when Joseph received the Book of Mormon and brought it forth, he was a good man, filled with the Holy Ghost, but he considered he had now fallen. I interrogated Oliver Cowdery in the same manner, who answered me similarly." So both David and Oliver, even after they'd been excommunicated and left the church, and both for a time believed that Joseph was a fallen prophet. David Whitmer actually never came back, and that was still his belief till the end of his life. Said, "As sure as there's a God, we saw the angel in the plates," and they stay true to their testimony of the Book of Mormon. Because you think if they were just in on it, this would have been a prime time for them to maybe have denied or questioned if Joseph had done some sort of hypnosis on them. In an interview with Edward Stevenson, he says, Edward Stevenson writes in 1886, I have often heard him, Oliver Cowdery, bear faithful testimony to the restoration of the gospel by the visitation of an angel. He testified that he beheld the plates, the leaves being turned over by the angel, whose voice he heard, and that they were commanded as witnesses to bear faithful testimony to the world of the vision that they were favored to behold. Elizabeth Ann Cowdery, who was Oliver Cowdery's wife, she writes, my husband Oliver Cowdery bore his testimony to the truth and divine origin of the Book of Mormon as one of the three witnesses of the Book of Mormon. So, her being Oliver's wife, she's saying that he always stayed true and bore his testimony of the divine origin and never denied it. Philander Page, son of Hiram Page, said he was present at the deathbed of Oliver Cowdery. Oliver conversed with the brethren and reaffirmed his testimony to the Book of Mormon and to be faithful to their testimony. In 1876, John Whitmer wrote a lengthy letter to Mark Forscott, which included the following. I have never heard him deny the truth of his testimony of the Book of Mormon under any circumstances whatever. Neither do I believe that he would have denied at the peril of his life. So firm was he that he could not be made to deny what he has affirmed to be a divine revelation from God. And that is about Oliver Cowdery from John Whitmer. This is a journal of a Shaker leader who talks about that they were visited by some missionaries. He talks about Oliver Cowdery and stated that he had been one who assisted in the translation of the Golden Bible and had seen the angel and also had been commissioned by him to go out and bear his testimony. There's another account where when the missionaries go forth and Oliver Cowdery bore his testimony to the administration of an angel at noonday. I've taken this from Latter-day Saints Q&A, what he has to say about Oliver's testimony. Oliver is one of the three witnesses who bore testimony that an angel of God came down from heaven. The two other witnesses made it clear that Oliver was a fellow witness with them, not the author of the book. If Oliver wrote the Book of Mormon, then one must ask, what was his motive? He received no fame, no money, no lasting power for writing the book, and for remaining silent about his true authorship. In fact, 8 years after the Book of Mormon was published, Oliver was excommunicated from the church. If there was ever a time to expose Joseph as a fraud, that was it. His chance to get even and declare who the true author was. But none of that happened. To the contrary, even though it was some years before Oliver returned to the church, he always remained true to his testimony. And that's true. Oliver remains true to his testimony of the Book of Mormon, of the angel and gold plates, despite being excommunicated and being away from the church for around a decade, eventually coming back at the end of his life, bearing his testimony on his deathbed. And the quote where he talks about that it was not human juggling, the angel came down, appeared from heaven, showed us the plates. It wasn't a vain imagination or a dream, it was real. At least to Oliver, it seems like he believes and he knows that he really saw the angel in the plates and stayed true to his testimony. And critics often like to focus on his excommunication as evidence, sort of impeaching Oliver as an unreliable witness, that maybe Oliver was part of a conspiracy with Joseph. And that's sort of the argument when it comes to the priesthood restoration and visitations of John the Baptist and Peter, James, and John. And I honestly think the witnesses had much to gain from denying their testimony. It would be the equivalent of like an apostle in the LDS church whistleblowing that the church is a fraud. I know that they would be healed up in the ex-Mormon community. And I don't think Oliver had an incentive to continue the conspiracy and had probably more of an incentive to admit deception or the possibility that maybe there's some sort of hypnosis, that Joseph Smith sort of got them into this religious frenzy and trance, questioning the experience. But Oliver never denies his testimony he wasn't involved in a conspiracy. We'll talk about this later, but mass hallucination or conspiracy doesn't seem to be really supported by the evidence. It seems quite unlikely. Okay, so let's talk about Martin Harris, and we'll read through a lot of his statements. Now, we read before that they refer to spiritual eyes, spiritual vision, eye of faith, and those are scriptural words. Even having visions of an angel, there's lots of experiences in the Bible. So I don't see that as that necessarily means that it was just in his mind, it wasn't real. And as we read about these 15 statements I have for Martin Harris, I think he makes it quite clear. So in 1853, he says, I was the right-hand man of Joseph Smith, And I know that he was a prophet of God. I know the Book of Mormon is true. Then, smiting his fist on the table, he said, And you know that I know it is true. I know that the plates have been translated by the gift and power of God, for his voice declared it unto us. Therefore, I know of a surety that the work is true. And he says, As many of the plates as Joseph Smith translated, I handled with my hand plate after plate. Quote, so when Martin Harris came out of a meeting, he was beset with a crowd in the street, expecting that he would furnish them with material to war against Mormonism. But when he was asked if Joseph Smith was a true prophet of God, he answered yes. And when asked if the Book of Mormon was true, this was his answer. Do you know that the sun is shining on us? Because as sure as you know that, I know that Joseph Smith was a true prophet of God and that he translated the book by the power of God. In the Painesville Telegraph, he told all about the gold plates, angel spirits, and Joe Smith, that he had seen and handled them all by the power of God. In 1869, letter written to W.H. Homer, he says, Young man, do you see that sun shining through that window? Just so sure as that sun shines and gives us light by day, and the moon and the stars give us light by night, just so sure I know the Book of Mormon is true. For I saw the angel, I heard his voice, I saw and handled the plates upon which the Book of Mormon was written. In 1870, he was interviewed by Edward Stevenson. Martin, I think, is sharing a time, and he says at the conclusion, they asked him if he really believed the testimony that he had signed in the Book of Mormon to be true. He replied, no, he did not believe it, but much to their surprise, he then said he knew it to be true. Another statement, this again coming from Edward Stevenson. Gentlemen, what I have said is true from the fact that my belief is swallowed up in knowledge. For I want to say to you that as the Lord lives, I do know that I stood with the prophet Joseph Smith in the presence of the angel, and it was in the brightness of the day. In 1893, Martin Harris says, I can prove by the Bible the truth of the work, as well as being an eyewitness, for I saw the book in the angel's hands, and I also heard his voice. In 1870, with the interview with William Wadoops, he says, Young man, I had the privilege of being with the prophet Joseph Smith, and with these eyes of mine, pointing to his eyes, he says, I saw the angel of the Lord, and I saw the plates, and the Urim and Thummim, and the sword of Laban, and with these ears, pointing to his ears, I heard the voice of the angel, and with these hands, holding out to his hands, I handled the plates containing the record of the Book of Mormon, and I assisted the prophet in the translation thereof. So he's pointing to his eyes, saying, with these eyes, I saw the angel in the plates. With these ears, I heard the voice declaring it to be true. And he's also talking about holding the plates as well, likely when he was a scribe. And interesting because David Whitmer talks about seeing the not just the angel in the plates, but the Urim and Thummim, the sword of Laban, and those things are also mentioned by Martin Harris in this account. In the Saints Herald, Martin was asked, Did you go to England to lecture against Mormonism? I answered emphatically, No, I did not. No man ever heard me in any way deny the truth of the Book of Mormon, the administration of the angel that showed me the plates. The Lord has shown me these things by his Spirit, by the administration of holy angels, and confirmed the same with signs following. 1874, 1875 from Theodore Farley. This is an account from multiple statements of Thomas Farley, and this was given by Theodore Farley Sr. at a priesthood session. He stated that he stood in broad daylight when an angel from heaven came down with the plates in his arms, and he stood side by side with the angel when the angel did turn over leaf after leaf of the book that had been translated into our language. That after the angel had shown him the plates and disappeared, he heard a voice from heaven that thrilled every fiber of his body, stating that the book had been translated by the gift and power of God, and not of man, and he was commanded by the Lord to so make that statement to the world, and he did. Now it was my privilege to hear Martin Harris relate that time and time again at our table. In an interview with John E. Godfrey in 1875, he says, after praying some time, the angel appeared with the golden plates, and I saw with these two eyes the angel stand with the gold plates in his hands, and I saw him turn leaf by leaf the plates of gold. And I also heard the voice of the Lord saying that these words were true and translated correctly. So while there's some statements from Martin Harris referring to spiritual eyes, there's been a few statements here that we've read where he points that these eyes saw the angel and the plates, that the plates were turned each leaf, and he heard the voice of the Lord saying that these things are true. In an interview with Alma Jensen, it's there's an account that says, "Now I don't believe, but I know the Book of Mormon to be true. For with these eyes I saw the angel, and with these ears pointing to them, I'd heard him say it was a true and correct record of an ancient people that dwelt upon this, the American continent. And I hereby testify to you young men that it is true." Account I got from Richard Lloyd Anderson. Martin Harris says, "Gentlemen, do you see that hand? Are you sure you see it? Are your eyes playing a trick or something?" "No." "Well, as sure as you see my hand, as sure did I see the angel and the plates." And this really does not sound like second sight, spiritual eyes. I just imagined it in my mind. He's saying, like, I saw it before you, as sure as you see the sun in the sky, as sure as you see my hand before you. There's another account which I don't have, but he talks about, like, do you see that chopping block? And as sure as you see the chopping block, I saw the plates, and I chop off my head before I would deny it. So these quotes, Martin Harris seems to be emphatic that I really did see the plates and the angel. Letter of Edward Stevenson to the Millennial Star. It says, "We have always taken you to be an honest, good farmer and neighbor of ours, but could not believe that you did see an angel. Now, Martin, do you really believe that you did see an angel when you were awake? Gentlemen, what I have said is true, from the fact that my belief is swallowed up in knowledge. For I want to say to you that as the Lord lives, I do know that I stood with the prophet Joseph Smith in the presence of the angel, and it was the brightness of the day." And this is one of Martin's final testimonies from George Godfrey. "The Book of Mormon is no fake. I know what I know, I have seen what I have seen, and I have heard what I have heard. I have seen the gold plates from which the Book of Mormon is written. An angel appeared to me and others and testified to the truthfulness of the record. And had I been willing to have perjured myself and sworn falsely to the testimony I now bear, I could have been a rich man. But I could not have testified other than I have done and am now doing, for these things are true." And summarizing Martin's statements, he says he knows, similar to Oliver Cowdery, that he saw the angel and he saw the plates. He saw with his eyes and he heard with his ears. It was real to him. And while there are other quotes that talk about spiritual eyes or it being a vision, this does not take away, as David Whitmer said, that they were in the body also, that they saw with their natural eyes, but they had to be spiritually prepared, and that there was a visionary element to it. But reading these statements, Martin Harris seems to be very clear that he knows he saw the angel in the plates. Okay, let's jump to David Whitmer. So this is going to be the longest section because he's got a lot of statements. So William McClellan, in his journal in July 1831, says, "David Whitmer then arose and bore testimony to having seen an holy angel who made known to him the truth of this record, and all these strange things I pondered in my heart." In 1872, this is from the Deseret News, "I visited Mr. David Whitmer, one of the witnesses of the Book of Mormon, and heard him bear testimony that he saw the angel of God and heard him declare that the plates were divine record." In 1875, in an interview in the Chicago Times, "No man can look at David Whitmer's face for a half hour while he charitably and modestly speaks of what he has seen, and then boldly and earnestly confesses the faith that is in him, and say that he is a bigot or an enthusiast." So even this coming from a secular person from the Chicago Times believes that David Whitmer is sincere, that he sincerely and earnestly believes what he is confessing about the angel in the plates, whether or not he did or not. In 1876, this is reported by Thomas Wood Smith, in most positive language. So he's saying that he has heard David Whitmer in most positive language, that he did truly see in broad daylight a bright and most beautiful being, an angel from heaven, who did hold in his hands the golden plates, which he turned over leaf by leaf, explaining the contents here and there. So that other quote where it talked about, like, oh, did the angel have any form? No form. It was just an impression. Uh, this is going against this quote where he's saying that I saw an angel from heaven who came in broad daylight. There was a brilliant light and was shown the plates each leaf. An account by Edward Stevenson. "We walked through a clearing and all sat on a log. It was about 11 a.m. when a light appeared and it grew brighter until an angel stood before us and on the appearance of a table was laid the plates. A voice declared and bore a record of the truth of the translation, turning the leaves over and over. Thus the vision ended." Another account by Edward Stevenson. "We passed through a clearing and sat in a log, which grew brighter and brighter until an angel stood before them with the plates and other things. The angel turned the leaves so that we could see the engravings We then heard a voice saying that those things were true and that the translation was correct. In an interview by P. William Poulsen, David Whitmer says Martin Harris is correct. We saw it, and our testimony, which we give to the world, is true exactly as you read it. We saw by the gift and power of God, as we were praying, the angel stood before us in his glory, and all those things were before us, as they were laid before us on a table. And we heard the testimony about the plates, and we were commanded to bear that testimony to the world. And our testimony is true. And when the angel had finished his words and shown us the plates one by one, which were to be translated, then the vision was closed at once. In an interview with Orson Pratt and Joseph F. Smith in 1878, he says, we, the three witnesses, not only saw the plates of the Book of Mormon, but the plates contain the record of the wickedness of the people of the world, and many other plates. The fact is, it was just as though Joseph, Oliver, and I were sitting right here in a log, when we were overshadowed by a light. It was not like the light of the sun, nor like that of a fire, but more glorious and beautiful. And I heard the voice of the Lord as distinctly as I ever heard anything in my life, declaring that they, the plates, were translated by the gift and power of God. Orson Pratt asked, did you see the angel at this time? David Whitmer, yes. He stood before us. Martin Harris was not with us at this time. I don't think he saw all that we did, but our testimony, as recorded in the Book of Mormon, is strictly and absolutely true, just as it was there written. David Whitmer to Mark H. Forscott in 2nd March 1875 says, my testimony to the world is written concerning the Book of Mormon, and it is the same that I gave at first, and it is the same as shall stand to my latest hour in life. Linger with me in death, and shine as gospel truth beyond the limits of life, among the tribunals of heaven. And this is from David Whitmer to Heman C. Smith on the 5th of December, 1876. My testimony to the Book of Mormon is true, and I am admonished neither to add nor take away from my testimony already appended to the book. So he's definitely reaffirming the testimony that is found in the official testimony of the witnesses, but there's a lot more. In 1879, this is published in the 1879 Saints Herald. I have heard the same from the mouth of Father Whitmer more than once. Every time I have ever heard him tell the particulars of that glorious scene, he always told it just the same. And as far as I have ever heard from reliable witnesses, he has always told the same story. As you read my testimony given many years ago, so it stands as my own existence, the same as when I gave it, and so shall stand throughout the cycles of eternity. In 1881, David Whitmer, a proclamation, and this comes from Dan Vogel's Early Mormon Documents. He says that the world may know the truth. I wish now, standing as it were in the very sunset of life and in the fear of God once for all, to make this public statement that I never at any time denied the testimony or any part thereof which has so long been published with that book as one of the three witnesses. Those who know me best well know that I have always adhered to that testimony. No man may be misled or doubt my present views in regard to the same. I do now again affirm the truth of all my statements, and then made and published. He that hath an ear to hear, let him hear. It was no delusion. What is written, and he that readeth, let him understand. So he's clarifying that he has never denied his testimony of seeing the angel and seeing the plates. And while they said in the video that maybe David Whitmer's testimony has changed over time, as we go through the rest of the statements, it's very consistent and emphatic. And it was no delusion, trick, or hallucination to him. In an interview with the Chicago Times in 1881, he's asked, did you see the angel? Yes, he stood before us. Whitmer, Joseph, and Oliver. Our testimony is recorded in the Book of Mormon is absolutely true, just as it is written there. What you see is true. Testify to the same they were told. At that time, Mr. Whitmer saw the tablet gaze with awe on the celestial messenger. He was told what you see is true, testify to the same, and Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer, standing there, felt as the white garments of the angel faded from their vision, and the heavenly voice still rang in their ears, that it was no delusion, that it was a fact, and they so recorded it. In 1882, this is an interview with William H. Kelly and George A. Blakesley. He says, we then kneeled down and prayed. Joseph prayed. We then got up and sat in the log and were talking, when all at once a light came down from above and then encircled us for quite a little distance around, and the angel stood before us. He was dressed in white. This is all that I heard the angel say. and spoke and called me by name and said, Blessed is he that keepeth his commandments. This is all that I heard the angel say. A table was set before us, and on it the records were placed. While we were viewing them, the voice of God spoke out of heaven, saying, The book of Mormon was true, and that the translation was correct. How do you know it was the voice of God? We knew it was the voice of God. I knew it was the voice of God, just as well as I knew anything. In an interview with Jonas W. Chatburn in the Saints Herald in 1882, we asked him if his testimony was the same now as it was at the time the Book of Mormon was published regarding seeing the plates and the angel. He rose to his feet, stretched out his hands, and said, These hands handled the plates, these eyes saw the angel, and these ears heard his voice, and I know it was of God. That was the strongest testimony I ever heard, and I felt that he was telling the truth. I feel like that's quite powerful and emphatic. In an interview with Joe Smith III and others on 4th of April 1882, in answer to questions by the brethren, he recited with graphic distinctness the scene in which he received the testimony he bore many years past, I think it should say, and still bears to the Book of Mormon, and have averred anew that the statement made by him as published in the book is true. No one who listens to him can doubt the sincerity and truthfulness of the man. David Whitmer to St. Mouch on the 18th of November 1882 says, My testimony is published in connection with the Book of Mormon is true, and why should men ask to know more in regard to all the particulars connected with that overshadowing truth? In an interview with James H. Hart on the 21st of August 1883, he says, I have been visited by thousands of people, believers and unbelievers, men and ladies of all degrees, sometimes as many as 15 in one day, and have never failed in my testimony. And they will know someday that my testimony is true. I heard the voice of an angel, just as stated in said book, and the engravings on the plates were shown to us, and we were commanded to bear record of them. We were commanded to bear record of them, and if they are not true, then there is no truth. And if there is no truth, there is no God. And if there is no God, then there is no existence. But there is a God, and I know it. In an interview with James H. Hart, he also says in 1883, there was a glory attending it that no one could describe. No human tongue could tell the glorious scenes that were presented to them. In 1884, in an interview with Joe Smith III, when asked, this is David Whitmer's response, if he had been mistaken or had simply been moved upon by some mental disturbance or hallucination, which had deceived them into thinking they saw the personage, the angel, the plates, the Urim and Thummim, and the sword of Laban. This was suggested by Colonel Giles, and this is his response. How well and distinctly I remember the manner in which Elder Whitmer arose and drew himself up to his full height, a little over 6 feet, and said in solemn and impressive tones, No, sir, I was not under any hallucination, nor was I deceived. I saw with these eyes and heard with these ears. I know whereof I speak. So again, he's reiterating that he knows what he saw. He saw it with his eyes, heard with his ears. He knew what he experienced. It wasn't a mental disturbance or a hallucination. It was real, at least real to him. In an interview with Frank McDowell on 8th of May 1884, he says, I saw the angel as plainly as I see you. He was surrounded by the glory of God, which overshadowed us, and we heard his voice, and we saw the records of the Book of Mormon. My testimony is the same as at the beginning and is true. Another interview with James H. Hart on the 10th of March 1884, he says Oliver never wavered in his testimony, and when he was on his deathbed, I was there with many of his friends until he passed away. He bore the same testimony on his dying bed that he had always borne through life, and earnestly called upon all to cleave to the truth revealed through the prophet Joseph, and to serve the Lord. As for myself, I have never denied my testimony that is published in the Book of Mormon. In an interview with E.C. Briggs in 1884, he says, in June 1829, I, David Whitmer, saw the angel by the power of God. Joseph, Oliver, and I were alone, and a light from heaven shone around us, and solemnity pervaded our minds. The angel appeared in the light, as near as that young man. My testimony of the Book of Mormon is true. I can't deviate from it. In an interview with an unknown reporter in 1884, he says, I saw this apparition myself and gazed with awe on the celestial messenger, and heard him say, Blessed is the Lord, and he that keepeth his commandments. Then, as he held the plates and turned them over with his hands so that we could see them plainly, a voice that seemed to fill all space was heard, saying, "What you say is true, testify to the same." Oliver Cowdery and I, standing there, felt as the white garments of the angel faded from my view that we had received a message from God, and we have so recorded it. In an interview with Franklin D. Richards in 1885, he says, "I did see the angel of God and was commanded to testify of these things so they are true. Read the printed testimony of the three witnesses, which you will find on one of the front pages of the Book of Mormon, and I say to you that every word of it is true." In 1886, in an interview with Edward Stevenson, he says, "As I live and stand upon the earth, so sure did I see the angel who stood before us. While we were sitting upon a log, that is Joseph and I and Oliver Cowdery, we were talking when a bright light began to shine around us. It grew bright and brighter until an angel stood before us. We also heard a voice commanding us to to bear a testimony of these things to the world." In an interview with Nathan Tanner in 1886, I asked him if the table which the angel brought, uh, and upon which the plates lay when he viewed them, was a tangible one. He said that he did not touch it, it had the resemblance of a table. He then explained that he saw the plates and with his natural eyes, but he had to be prepared for it, that he and the other witnesses were overshadowed by the power of God and a halo of brightness indescribable. So he's talking about, like, yeah, it was their natural eyes, but they had to be prepared for it, that they were in the spirit as well, that you can't see an angel without being in the spirit, and that they're overshadowed by the power of God and a halo of brightness. Which, if this wasn't part of them seeing the angel, there being this visionary, this brilliant, undescribable light, I always think, like, this doesn't sound like a heavenly visitation. In June 1829, in All Believers in Christ, he says, "The Lord called Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris, and myself as the three witnesses to behold the vision of the angel as recorded in the forepart of the Book of Mormon, and to bear testimony of the world that the Book of Mormon is true. I was not called to bear testimony of the mission of Brother Joseph any farther than his work of translating the Book of Mormon." So even though he doesn't believe that Joseph Smith, he believes he was a fallen prophet and had issues with like the priesthood restoration changes made to Revelation, he was called to be a witness to the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon and the gold plates, which he never denies. David Whitmer to Sister Gates on the 11th of February 1887 says, "Of course I would tell you about my vision of the angel. You asked me if I saw the angel when he brought the plates. I saw the angel when he brought the plates, and the angel told us that we must bear testimony to the world." The Omaha Herald in 1886 says, "Can you explain the supernatural power that surrounded you?" David Whitmer says, "All of a sudden I beheld a dazzlingly brilliant light that surpassed in brightness even the sun at noonday, and which seemed to envelop the woods for a considerable distance around." And he says, "Felt chained to the spot, while I also experienced the sensation of joy absolutely indescribable." In 1887, to Robert Nelson, he says, "I did see the angel as is recorded in my testimony in the Book of Mormon. The book is true." In 1888, to Anthony Metcalf, "In regards to my testimony to the visitation of the angel who declared to us three witnesses that the Book of Mormon is true, I have this to say. Of course, we were in the spirit when we had the view, for no man can behold the face of an angel except in a spiritual view, but we were in the body also. And you and everything was as natural to us as it is at any time. Martin Harris, you say, called it being in vision. We read in the scriptures Cornelius saw in a vision an angel of God. Daniel saw an angel in a vision. Also, in other places, it states they saw an angel in the spirit. A bright light enveloped us where we were that filled the woods at noonday, and there in a vision or in the spirit, we saw and heard just as it is stated in my testimony in the Book of Mormon." In 1888, reported by B. H. Roberts, he, David Whitmer, stated that the Book of Mormon was true, that his statement in connection with that of Oliver Cowdery and Martin Harris was strictly correct. He had nothing to add to it nor to diminish from it. In an interview with Edwin G. Woolley, this is from his diary, he says, "During our interview, Mr. Whitmer reiterated his testimony as given at the beginning of the Book of Mormon, saying that all he testified to there was true, that he had seen the plates and the heavenly messenger as he had stated." Apostate William E. McClellan wrote, I saw him, David Whitmer, June 1879, and heard him bear a solemn testimony to the truth of the book, as sincerely and solemnly as when he bore it to me in Paris, 3rd, in July 1831. So this is coming from an apostate, William McClellan. This is 48 years later that his testimony was as sincere, as solemn as it was when the Book of Mormon was first published. James Moyle, who was later Secretary of the Treasury in two US administrations, begged of him not to let me go through this life believing in a vital falsehood. Was there any possibility that he might have been deceived in any particular? No question about its truthfulness. To have been insincere seems impossible. It would have made him a hideous, soulless mental deformity. And sorry, that's what James Moyle said because Dave Whitmer just reaffirmed it. When asked about did he see them with his natural eyes, Dave Whitmer said, I've been asked if we saw those things with our natural eyes. Of course they were our natural eyes. There is no doubt that our eyes were prepared for the sight, but they were our natural eyes nevertheless. The Richmond Democrat also added this comment. Skeptics may laugh and scoff if they will, but no man can listen to Mr. Whitmer as he talks of his interview with the angel of the Lord without being most forcibly convinced that he has heard an honest man tell what he honestly believes to be true. So, when another anti Mormon published an article claiming that David had denied his testimony, David printed this proclamation. It is recorded in the American Encyclopedia and the Encyclopedia Britannica that I, David Whitmer, have denied my testimony as one of the three witnesses to the divinity of the Book of Mormon, and that the two other witnesses, Oliver Cowdery and Martin Harris, denied their testimony to that book. I will say once more to all mankind that I have never at any time denied that testimony or any part thereof. I also testify to the world that neither Oliver nor Martin Harris ever at any time denied their testimony. They both died affirming the truth of the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon, even under gunpoint. I have a quote here from John P. Green. When the mobs again assembled, they went to the houses of several of leading Mormons, including David Whitmer, told them to bid their families farewell, for they would never see them again. Then, driving them at the point of the bayonet to the public square, they stripped and tarred and feathered them. The commanding officer then called 12 of his men, ordering them to cock their guns and present them at the prisoners' breasts, and to be ready to fire when he gave the word. He addressed the prisoners, threatening them with instant death unless they denied the Book of Mormon and confessed it to be a fraud. At the same time, adding that if they did so, they might enjoy the privileges of citizens. David Whitmer hereupon lifted up his hands and bore witness that the Book of Mormon was the word of God. The mob then let them go. David told Heman Smith that on command of the mob to renounce his testimony, he nevertheless reaffirmed in the face of death. As David told James Hart, the testimony I gave to that mob made them fear and tremble, and I escaped from them. One gentleman, a doctor, an unbeliever, told me afterwards that the bold and fearless testimony borne on that occasion and the fear that seemed to take hold of the mob had made him a believer in the Book of Mormon. Conclusion on David Whitmer: there is large quantities of evidence of supporting David's reliability as a witness, the consistency of his statements, decades of confirmation, and even when threatened, tarred, and feathered, he didn't recant his testimony. And because he left the church, he might have had more of a bias to deny. And I just want to say that as I read through a lot of these statements from Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris, and David Whitmer, in collectively in totality, they are absolutely adamant that they know they saw the angel in the plates and heard the voice of God, that it was shown to them, that it was they saw with their eyes and heard with their ears, that it was not juggling, a trick, a mental disturbance, a hallucination to them. They know it was real and they stay true to their testimonies throughout their lives. We can, I think, get really caught up on the words about spiritual eyes or vision, but that is their testimonies. And I think it's really important whether or not you want to believe it was a hallucination or believe it was just something they imagined. That could be correct. They could be mistaken. But it's important to represent their testimonies that they are sure they know what they saw and experienced, and they stay true to it throughout their lives. And I personally feel that if critics just focus on a few second or third hand statements and make it seem like, well, this is what the witnesses actually said about their experience of seeing the angel in the plates, and omit all of these statements, I think that's misleading. I don't think that's being transparent or fair to the witnesses about what they believe they experienced, what they know they experienced. I've not seen a vision. I don't know if they really did see the gold plates. It's faith whether or not we accept it or not. But as many people said, they seem sincere. They sincerely believe it. You can tell they're heartfelt, good, honest men who have this experience, who never deny it throughout their lives, despite leaving the church at times. And I think their testimonies are powerful. I think they need to be taken seriously, particularly like if you are a Christian who believes in God and angels and supernatural things. This can't be dismissed, particularly the unlikelihood of a mass hallucination happening, which Joseph Smith prophesied in the Book of Mormon, that all three witnesses would happen to see the angel and the plates and other objects and never deny it throughout their lives. That is just an incredible thing to pull off. Is it possible that maybe they could be telling the truth? Now, of course, I can understand why people would examine Book of Mormon historicity or the text, and if they come to the conclusion this book is not historical, that they lean more towards this being a 19th century text, then of course you have to explain away the witnesses. But I personally feel that the most intellectually honest thing to do is to acknowledge that these men say they know they saw and handled the plates, that they saw the angel, saw the plates, heard the voice of God, and it was real to them. But just say, well, I don't believe it was. It was a hallucination, even though they were adamant it wasn't. But to focus on and cherry pick a few second, third hand statements, I personally feel is misrepresenting what they claim. And when we combine this with the testimony of the 8 witnesses who do talk about seeing and handling the plates, and I know they're going to do an episode on them, and I'll probably do a response, as well as informal witnesses, the combination of supernatural and natural witnesses, to me, I think combined together is definitely evidence or case for the plates being authentic. And particularly as I read through all of these statements from the witnesses, I see their sincerity. They seem sincere. They honestly believe it. They're absolutely certain of what they experienced. And I think they need to be taken more seriously and not just brushed off as being these religious nuts who just claimed everything was spiritualized and they just saw it in their mind. That is not correctly representing their statements. And that they had just this terrible character that many people upheld that they were good, honest men with integrity, who particularly Oliver and David had very successful careers and were upheld by others in their community. But people almost find it hard to believe how they could believe this delusion. Obviously, if people want to side with the critics, I think that's fine. If you feel like the Book of Mormon isn't what it claims to be, you don't believe in God or Jesus or angels, then I totally understand rejecting their testimony. But the point of this was to provide a more comprehensive view of their statements and context that I believe that they left out in their analysis. And I hope if you take both of these episodes, there will be more informed consent. You'll be more informed on the statements of the witnesses, what other people had to say about the witnesses as well. Thanks very much for watching. Like, share, and subscribe. If you would like to donate to support for me to keep going, keep doing more interviews, more research, more episodes, more series, please support me. And I would like to also upgrade my camera, mic equipment, all those sorts of things. And there's a lot of time and energy that goes into this. Any donations are appreciated, but just keep watching. And thanks so much. If I was to recommend one resource on the witnesses, this would be it. Investing in Book of Mormon Witnesses. LDS Truth Claims has some good episodes on the witnesses as well. And I'm also going to make the last hour or so, where I went through all the witnesses' statements, its own episode as well, because I think it's really important for people to hear those. Thanks so much for watching. Take care. Bye. Thanks everyone for watching this episode. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like, share it with others who might benefit, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future content. You can also listen to these episodes on podcast form on Anchor or Spotify, and you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Check out my website for more content, personal blog, and more. And if you care to donate to support me, you can via my PayPal or Patreon, or through the website. And you can also give donations via YouTube through Super Chats. Thanks for watching Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Bye-bye.